Three suggestions: more case studies on ePractice.eu from public sector from across Europe. If you actually want people to think about it not as a technical issue but as how do we benefit in sharing knowledge, run a knowledge cafe. The things that David Gertein's been organising all across the country, where people who are interested in knowledge management in organisations, CEOs and so on, get stories of how they learnt things from each other, how they worked together in communities, how they brought in people from outside.
Yes.
And it's from these stories you realise there's actually a benefit, which otherwise you wouldn't.
Yes.
And the third little thing, if they're the sort of people who will rate nine positives against one negative, we've got a computer game to teach you about uncertainty, and they can play that and they can learn that the whole world is uncertain.
Is this your
This is a research project we're doing, quiz.worldofuncertainty.org. Quiz.worldofuncertainty.org.
Quiz.worldofuncertainty.org.
It's just a game where you can actually become a better booker. You learn how to judge how certain you are about things. And for people who really set, it must be absolutely certain, that and understanding uncertainty, which is statistician David Spiegelhalter does at Cambridge, you know, the sorts of things like why you shouldn't buy a lottery ticket the day before, because you're more likely to be run over and die in that day than you are to win the jackpot.
Okay, understanding risk. Right, anything else? We've got 4 minutes to squander.
Have you had any successes in trying to get like a public sector organisation trying to progress forward into advisors?
On the technical stuff, I think it's something that I've not seen any data yet, but certainly one of the things what we picked up at the Reboot Britain event that we did in July last year was we had a few people who came up and said that they'd come up with various strategies to convince their management of different things. And I think the browser is the classic one, and it's the IE is just less secure than Firefox and less secure than Chrome and Safari.
I can jump in real quick. Lunch has been delayed a little bit. It'll be here just after 12:30. So if you want to go on a while longer, so that's an hour and a half for lunch. And then we're back. All the talks after lunch have been pushed forward half an hour. So first talk by 1:30. I've updated the schedule down by the lecture. Thanks, guys. Sorry for interrupting.
So another half an hour. Anything else, or shall we just draw this to a close and let you go and get along the lunch?
I work in a public sector organisation, and I would love it to be a lot more open and access to all these tools on the desktop. But in the current climate of finance is a big issue in public sector organisations, and you always get the need. I notice you're wearing Daily Mail on your t-shirt.
Yeah.
As public sector organisations, how do we counter the knee jerks that the Daily Mail and those sorts of media outlets have regarding public servants wasting time on Facebook or Twitter or whatever? You know, how do you convince those people not to knee jerk and say, well, actually, this is a good thing. This is providing more value for the public purse rather than
Well, there's an organisation called the Taxpayers Alliance that have been doing precisely that, and they do really jump on any example of public sector people doing anything as an example of why the public sector should be abolished. But there are plenty of examples. Well, I think there is a slightly insoluble problem there in that, you know, when you try and get across rational ideas, often you can't get them across. But certainly, the incoming government, and I'm not known as their greatest fan generally, but the incoming government are a lot more open to the idea of open source software than you know, and I think it's very easy to present open source software as something that saves money. I think a lot of the outgoing government were very keen on, a lot of strategies were geared towards the eventual arrival of an ID card system and a much more centralised database. And I think an awful lot of, and I think actually that often the costs of that have been understated rather than overstated. So if you're not working towards this nirvana where everybody has exists in 3 or 4 places on the great database, then a lot of the costs do go down. But certainly the idea of more intelligently managing machines can save you an awful lot of money. I I mean, Microsoft costs the public sector an absolute fortune, and as a friend of mine puts it, it's time people started getting sacked for buying IBM. You know, the old adage that no one ever got sacked for buying IBM. It's time people did start getting sacked for buying IBM. And actually, you know, in a sense, the move should be led towards more decentralised systems where you don't have IT managers who are dictating policies. And those policies are based on risk aversion as well. They're often based on, you know, we can't let you upload photographs to your website.
I appreciate they're very risk averse, but they've had to be risk averse because every time they do something open or data gets out, they get absolutely beat up on the press, and public sector workers just go, well, stop that. I'm just going to lock the whole thing down, and if people want to be open on social, they can do it on their own machines at home. I just want to look after one image for all those machines, and that makes my job as a...
Yes.
I used to look after IT in public sector. I don't anymore, thankfully. But sometimes you just got to go, well, we're going to get beat up, so we might as well just lock the whole down.
Yes.
How do you get past that? How do you say, you know, we've got to be more open, but we've got to be secure? How do you do that?
I mean, I've got an answer for that, but I'm sure other people have. Anyone else got a...
Well, I was going to reiterate what Paul said about the new government coming in. Don't underestimate that. I mean, you can overestimate it in the short term, but in the longer term, these data is going to be released. I mean, the Ordnance Survey stuff's just come out, and that was under the old government. The new government's got plans to kind of release what it's spending, all the rest of it. So there will be a long-term downward pressure from the top to say, look, I know there's a risk in this, but you've got to start. You're going to have to do it anyway, because I'm telling you, you've got to release it. And you know, I think, you know, Liam's kind of point here about releasing case studies and making the rhetorical case in the public that actually holding on to old technology is actually undermining security. And so I think the two things is the top-down initiative from Westminster, Whitehall, and the second thing is the conversations have got to get more tacked up, more people actually bringing together evidence and pushing for the fact actually you need to be talking to the outside world because they're already talking about you.
How do you see the sort of differences between Whitehall, who seem to be very forward-thinking, and the local institutions? We're in a better position because we've got sort of one of everything in Northern Ireland. How do we change the perceptions at the top of, say, the Assembly or the top of the, say, the Permanent Secretary